Hi, everyone. It is Friday, and my name is Tilly Elvrum, and I am your host here at the Parent Exchange. And today I have a wonderful guest that I'm really excited to spend some time with this week. I have Gwen Samuel with me, and she is the founder of the Connecticut Parents Union. And she is a fierce mama advocate and just really enjoy interacting with her on social media and watching how she engages with her community and how she supports families in their search for educational opportunity for their children. So really glad that you're here, Gwen. We had a couple technical difficulties, and hopefully Zoom and Facebook cooperate with us today. But I want to thank you for being here, because you were at the DMV all morning, which is always an adventure. And so you rushed back here after being in a heck of a line to talk about education. So thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Tilly, and thank you for being having a boss podcast. All right, the Parent Exchange, exchanging
right.
ideas, exchanging those the what we need to exchange so that we can have some more educational freedom. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm glad you're here. And, you know, this page was really born out of the COVID-19 crisis. And when schools closed, we knew as full-time online families, families who had exercised our school choice and chose online education, we understood it was going to be a difficult transition for our families in the traditional setting, whether they were in their neighborhood school, a charter school, private school. We just knew it was going to be a little bit bumpy for families, and we wanted to be a support. And so over, you know, the last 7 months, we've talked to parents in California, in Texas, and Ohio, and Florida, all over. But we really hadn't spent a lot of time with folks in the Northeast. And, you know, I just see you every day, like I said, interacting with, you know, your community and supporting families. And you've been doing this for a very long time.
I think too long, because
Yeah.
you would think at some point, a child's right to a quality education, a safe one, wouldn't be this hard. You
Yeah.
know, we should all be able to just sit back in the rocking chair and watch our children grow up and, leave the nest. But the reality is, if parents are not on their game, and I mean probably a game we have not seen before, our children will continue to fall through the cracks. And this pandemic has forced a lot of families to even reassess the educational experience their children are having. I'm seeing trends where parents are like, wait a minute, I didn't know that my children's reading level was really this low when they got home. So when the pandemic has really exposed children's uh, areas that they struggled in.
Yeah.
And
And so,
parents
I
are
mean,
also having awakening. Yeah.
yeah, and that's why I wanted to talk to you, because, you know, we've really been trying to support families, meeting them where they're at, finding out what they need. And, you know, we're back, schools are reopening. And here in our house, we have, my nephew is here. He doesn't have internet at home. And the district hasn't necessarily been very responsive. And thank God he has us. But I think about, you know, other families who, where do they go? What do they do when they can't get a device, when they can't get internet access? You know, just when the system just isn't meeting their needs. And so, you know, I really wanted to talk to you about, you know, education during COVID for the families that you support, what's been going on, what was their experience during when the crisis first started, has it improved as schools start to reopen? Like, you know, just what's the temperature of the room where you're at?
Right. Here and actually across the country. So I'm going to reference a survey from the National Parents Union. And there was a survey that talked about, it was like 40% suburban moms were okay. They're like, whatever happens, I'm going to be okay because my children, I have the resources and the support systems in play to ensure my child's academic success, pandemic or not. But the reality is, then you have what I call like the Title I population, right? Your working poor families, your low income families, right? Where school was a safe haven, but didn't necessarily mean it was a quality safe haven, right? But people were forced there. People keep forgetting that the law makes us send our kids to some of these schools. It's not that we're choosing it. I hear these surveys, 90% of families or 80% or 70% choose traditional public schools, even communities of color. I'm going to talk very specifically the Black community for a moment. And that's not the case. We forget we are forced. And if we don't send our children per zip code, they got a nice shiny jail cell for us, for most parents.
They have truancy laws, right?
They got a whole bunch of laws. And depending on where you live, if you live in Ohio, you could have, you could face arrest if you leave your school district and try to go elsewhere to another zip code. So that's one thing. And then number two, here we are in this pandemic. But I will say the beauty, as sad as, I hate to even say it that way, but I don't know another word to say it. But the interesting part of the pandemic is there is also an awakening occurring with parents. There's a trend I see where parents are asking more questions about what is really happening in schools. If my child is this behind, attending 180 days of school normally, 900 instructional hours, and now I'm in a pandemic, and my child barely, who's in middle school, can read an elementary school book. They're not only questioning the school and what they may or may not be doing, but they're also challenging themselves as parents. We, I should say, as parents, are challenging ourselves, wondering, am I paying attention as much as I should? Am I on my game as much as I should? So there's this two-pronged trend that's occurring. Number one, really realizing if you are in a poor performing school, just how poor performing it was. And then number two, have I as a parent really been doing all that I need to do to ensure my child's academic success? I shouldn't be this shocked by their reading level, but yet here we are. So, and that's a good thing, right? Because then there's awakening, and when there's awakening, then become questions. And then you start to question more. My meme on Facebook is question everything, especially about public education. This blind trust has never worked for vulnerable populations. This whole thing that the teachers alone are the experts. Parents have to see themselves as experts because they are the first responders in their home. Yep. And then I also have to push back against the school districts and say, you must remember, a child's school day does not begin in the classroom. It's from the home, whether it's a homeless shelter, whether you're living with someone else, or whether you got a stable home, it's still home. Then there's the community, because the bus travels through the community. Then it's the school. So if we are going to improve outcomes, those systems must work together, home, school, and the community. But the school says, we know best for your children. But the beauty of things happening right now is parents are pushing back against that narrative.
Well, you mentioned trust. So let's talk about trust. You were talking about suburban moms, and, if your kid was doing okay and you're in a great school district, you're probably like, okay, remote learning from the school, it'll be okay. Or we've got that population of parents that has really been pushing for school reopenings. But then if we look at polling and data for our Black and Latino communities, they're not so comfortable sending their kids back just yet. And I think there's a trust factor there.
Oh, very much so trust.
Talk about it. What has happened to the trust, and why are these families, they have genuine, real concerns about sending their kids back. And then we saw school reopening kind of get politicized.
Very politicized. I call that pandemic politics.
Right. And so talk about the trust. Like, why Why is there not enough trust in our public education system that these families feel okay to send their babies back?
Because we, especially as parents of color and the poor, historically, we are disproportionately marginalized, disenfranchised from educational opportunities, disproportionately punished, whether it's suspensions and expulsions, children as young as 5 years old. So there were already underlying trust issues prior to just historically, right? When we didn't want black and brown, black children in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're like, all of a sudden we love children, but the data shows otherwise. And then number two with trust is, there's still this forced element that's happening. Schools are still not owning that they have failed many children, especially the low performing ones. And so here you are asking me just to blindly trust you again, and during a pandemic, hoping things are going to get better. What changed from the pandemic, before the pandemic, to now? The only thing that's changed is we have a pandemic. Many of the same mentalities, many of the same prejudgments and stereotypes are still in play. And then there's this whole victim, well, black parents aren't really capable of educating their children, so we have to come save them. And I would have no problem saying to a school district, you are not God, and unless you have turned water into wine and you have parted the Red Sea, stop telling me you are the savior to the black community. And so that's part of the trust factor, because historically, it has panned out not good for black and brown and poor families. But number two, we have an opportunity, because schools were totally shut down. People are asking questions. That's the beauty. I'm sad to say it's beautiful, but it is beautiful to hear parents ask more questions now about how systems run. I'll give you another example. One of the top issues of this pandemic from the schools is, we're struggling to reach parents. Well, newsflash, you were having struggle. You said you had trouble reaching parents prior to the pandemic.
Right. These are the same kids. These are the same kids that, were vulnerable before. And now all of a sudden, now that you can't contact them. What were you doing before?
Yeah, it's just, and that's where I call the pandemic politics at play. I got a call today. Gwen, we heard that, teachers, and again, I'm not minimizing anyone's fear, right? Because the pandemic is real for what we know to be real, and people have died. Thousands of people have died. So I don't even want to trivialize a fear of an educator. With that said, in Connecticut, we faced another challenge where we had thousands, not hundreds, not a handful, thousands of children that had zero interactions with an educator during the pandemic. And so for the people who are pushing to go distance learning, I'm like, that'll be good, district, but where's your accountability measures? How do you even know if the teachers are going to even check in? And how I don't believe it is because everything I've learned about teachers, I've heard about their unions. And I've heard everything about unions comes with contracts. So if you're talking about we're going distance learning and you haven't mentioned nothing about a contract revision anywhere, it just lets me know that I'm just concerned for the well-being of children and the fidelity to do right by all children. Again, not minimizing a teacher's fears, but I've also know in my state, there have been those who have not stepped up to the plate to ensure those children are online and learning. But that's not just the educator. I won't blame that totally on educators, because all children still don't have access to internet access. Some don't have hotspots. Some don't have laptops. And so that's not an educator's responsibility per se. But I don't think we should let educators off the hook from doing their job, especially if taxpayers and parents and voters are still responsible to paying their paychecks. And nobody wants to have those conversations, but we need to have them.
Well, this is real talk, right? And these are real issues that, are affecting families and affecting students and getting their education. And I think it's a disservice to tiptoe around the issues because we're never
Absolutely.
going to get to the heart of the matter. And, so are your schools open yet? Are they opening? Like, this was our first week of school for a lot of districts here. Are you guys open?
Not till September 3rd. So
So you
Connecticut
gotta,
parents, yeah,
so
we got a week.
you got a week. So
Not
if
even a week.
if this next week goes like the weeks I've seen across the country, you're going to have a bunch of teachers getting a crash course in improving distance learning from the spring, because that's what I saw across the country is they really didn't get meaningful professional development up until right before school started, which, as somebody who has taught, alongside my child's educators in the online setting, that's worrisome. You cannot be proficient in a week before school starts in a new technology. You were talking about they're introducing new curriculum, in your area. How is that going to benefit students when, and I've heard it over and over, we're building the plane as we fly it.
No, not with other people's children. We're not doing that, because that's a plane going down right about now.
Yeah.
If you're building it in the air, we usually say that, but for now, if there's a plane being built in the air, our kids, and I think our kids are already in trouble, because there's multiple things. Number one, it's an election year, so the pandering is just beyond disgusting, right? People are trying to stay away from the educational issues. The candidates, people are saying, oh, vote for, oppose a parent's right to choose what's best for them. And then so there's just so much happening political that it's even making common sense leave the building. And so, and again, so I have mixed feelings of even about the professional development, because in Connecticut, we pay a lot of money to ensure our teachers are.
You have high taxes.
Oh, we got super high taxes.
Yeah.
It's just, so to say that I didn't have enough, professional development makes me wonder, did they ask for it, right? Did they push back on their unions to make sure? Because you will use your unions to come after parents. You'll use your unions to trample on children's rights. So use your unions to help you get professional development that taxpayer pay for anyway. So again, if we're going to have real talk in real time, then we need to push back on some of these unions to make sure their members have what they need to do the job responsibly and effectively. So I just can't just handle that last minute, because when we pay their salaries, our union members got raises during the pandemic. They were entitled to raise, so I'm not saying they shouldn't have gotten it, but our state is in a fiscal tsunami right now.
Yeah.
So what would have been the harm, like other states, delaying the raises, make sure they still get paid. Let's make sure we have our checks and balances in place. How are we going to, measure the academic progress of the children? How are we going to help these kids back on track? And that's a whole nother issue we're not even talking about, the additional academic supports these children need. Most children are being promoted to the next grade who were barely at grade level on the previous grade.
We haven't even touched on, we're still struggling to get schools reopened. We haven't even touched on the compensatory services that students are going to need coming out of the spring that they lost out on. So it's, I feel your frustration. And to me, it's just, like you said, this is a challenging time, but there's a lot of opportunity here.
Oh, absolutely. I'm with you there. And I'm capitalizing on everyone. Right. I'm so sorry I just cut you. So you said opportunity, I got all happy.
Yeah.
Because I've been speaking with faith leaders. We've been finding out, do they have extra space in their basements, right? Are there programs, mom and pops, we don't know about? There is an opportune time for communities to work together, more intentional and strategic, because Arnie Duncan was on former U.S. Secretary Arnie Duncan was on a podcast with Citizen Stewart a few weeks ago, maybe about a month or so ago.
It was good. I watched.
Oh, it was very good. And one thing Arnie said, I said, oh, Mr. Duncan, Arnie Duncan, he made it very clear that there needs to be massive after school and other support services to help these children get back on track. We don't even know what level they are going back to school. Yeah. Because of, just like we talk about the summer slide, we got the pandemic slide. We're talking 6 months, not even 2 months of summer. We had summer plus the end of the school year. And we're just pushing the kids back in and say, yo, pick up where you left off. Where was that? And how do you know that things are still being retained? And for the kind of money that's poured billions into education, I just think the adults have dropped the ball on many fronts regarding education. I get it's unprecedented, but in my state, we spend billions. And if billions can't get some of the brightest minds together to include parents and students and community leaders to come up with common sense approaches, this is why I know most of this opening is clearly pandemic politics, posturing and pandering. And that's not good for children at all, like at all.
Well, and I think we're in a crisis, but we really haven't had a crisis level response. You know, when I have a family member who has applied twice to get internet access because they can't afford it and basically have been ignored by their school district, that makes me wonder. But you know, luckily there's family, there's a safety net. What happens to those families that don't have a safety net, that they don't have a Gwen or a Tilly who don't mind ruffling feathers and aggravating people till you get what you need for your family? But what's happening to these kids? They're falling through the cracks. I mean,
exactly.
This is not a crisis response that we have going on right now. And this is an all hands on deck situation.
Absolutely, absolutely agree with that.
And it's very much like you said, it's going to take parents in partnership with their community, with the government piece, you know, with the educational system. It's going to take everybody to get our kids through this. And right. I just don't know if we quite reached that level of response. And I don't know what it's going to take, because here we are, schools reopening, and are we really that much better off than we were in the spring? I'm not so sure.
See, and that, I think, so to shift the conversation to parents, for well, we've been talking about parents, but I don't think it's just the government's responsibility, right? No, and so we know they have a legal obligation to educate. I mean, you know, most states have constitution, but here is a opportune time for parents to say, you know what, this is what I want for my children. And so let me work with other parents, other communities, to figure out how that pathway. And so that's what we're doing with families with the Connecticut Parents Union. We're helping parents make IEPs for themselves. I call it IEPs for parents. What is your individualized educational plan for your child, right? Because we still have displaced working, right? We've got evictions on the table. So most parents can't focus on their child's education, even when they want to, because they're trying to ensure that roof stays on their children's head, or they're going to have child welfare systems at their doorstep, right? So there are some serious ripple effects and repercussions if parents don't maintain their home while also ensuring the academic success of their children. That's why I believe every parent, even me, my child has 2 credits left. So I'm about to be an empty nester, but I got grandchildren. And I get on my son and the children. What is your plan? If you're going back to work, who's going to watch the children? You have to get in the weeds like that. When you wake up in the morning, what's your plan? I got to get ready for work. Okay, then what's going to happen with the child? Are they old enough to get themselves ready? Are they going to be? You have to think the whole plan through, because there are some things that are open. Schools may be reopening, but after school programs can still be closed. So, and if we don't pay attention to them after school closures, you're going to have latchkey kids. Then you have latchkey kids, and then you have kids with too much time on their hand. And then we have to go back to those PSA announcements. It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your child is?
Yeah.
We have to say that now. It's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Do you know where your child is? Right? So we still have to put the parents still have to just take even more. I know I'm not saying all parents, but this is almost like a next level of parenting because everything is so disjointed right now that you have to be even more on your game to ensure the safety of your children as well as academic, because the predators don't stop preying on children. Human trafficking hasn't stopped because of pandemic. Bad people, bad actors in the state employment haven't stopped being bad actors. So it's just the flattening of the school system just allows for parents to take more ownership and fight for educational freedom in the way that we have it because of politics. It's a good time to be collective, to say that we should be fighting for educational freedom. I'm looking for back on track scholarships. I want parents to be able to use some of their educational funding to get tutors, to get special needs support, to be able to send their child to maybe a retired teacher that can help them. Because if the school is open and not doing the job and you do distant learning, you still want to provide holistic education if possible. It's not easy, and I'm not claiming it is. But as parents, welcome to the world of parenthood. We got to do what we need to do to ensure their academic success and life success.
It's our responsibility. It's our
Absolutely.
responsibility.
Absolutely.
And that may mean less sleep than usual. And yeah, some parents that aren't familiar with online learning, they think that they just sit their kid in front of the computer and learning magically happens. And it takes a significant investment in parent time and supervision, to be there to make sure that learning is happening, that they are logged in when the teacher is doing a class, and that they're turning in assignments, and that they're not like my son was in 6th grade writing his novel when he should have been doing English class.
Right.
Those are the things that you have to do as a parent, but these are the most precious things that are entrusted to us, and that is our responsibility to do that. That said, families need a lot of support right now.
Absolutely. Exactly.
And that's where school choice comes into play. That's where funding comes into play. And so how are families there kind of dealing with the unknown? If, schools close again because, COVID cases go up, and, what are they going to do? Are they talking about pandemic pods, or is that just moms in my neighborhood talking about that? Or are private schools still taking kids in? Or are they, what are parents doing in Connecticut?
Well, I think I know it's a hybrid, because my state, again, is losing its mind, because they just had a meeting 2 weeks ago, August 11th, and they voted to reduce the 180 days and reduce 900 instructional hours. Now, some says that was the law. So, and they're doing a waiver, not reduce it, a waiver. There's no standard. A school district can give a child 10 hours and be okay.
Minimum?
No minimum.
Wow.
That's the politics. And they voted yes for it. So when I was on the call with legislators, everyone's like, when did this happen? August 11th. And why don't we all know about this? So on top of parents not being able to know, now parents are not even going to know if their child's even going to get a quality education, on top of the number of instructional hours needed to ensure the quality education.
We're not even talking quality. We're just talking minimum.
Exactly. Yeah, it's nothing. So, and they were like, and they voted for it. And so these are the things. It makes it hard for me as an advocate, because I'm so used to being on the ground. So now we need more community organizing training, because you need parents on the ground to be like peers supports to other parents. And then you got to be a parent leader to watch the public policies, because these policies, our governor still has executive order power until September. He can do anything he wants, and so far it hasn't been good for us. Everything he's just about done. And doesn't mean he didn't try. I want to give him the benefit of the doubt for the things he did do well. I just know that if he was silent when they allow that to be, waivers for instructional hours and days, that cannot be good for special needs children. That cannot be good because most districts struggle, especially in the urban communities, with providing adequate and effective special needs services. So to remove a minimum or a maximum, they can say, well, you know what? I gave her an hour. That's all the district can do because there's no standard. That's where we are in Connecticut, which means I won't be sleeping because you're working. And then on top of that, making sure, I'm doing self-care. Advocates out there have to be practicing self-care. I'm getting better, but still flunking it because the status quo doesn't sleep. And so since they don't sleep, you're thinking you're not sleeping, but it shouldn't be. We should be as partners, passing the baton. I should be able to take a cat nap while Miss Linda's out there doing it. But we all need to be vigilant, and we need to be watchdogs because these policies will shift on us, and our kids will be continue to be the losers instead of being held harmless. Our kids always lose when the politics come. And election year, I'm even more worried because of the pandering, because it's just unethical pandering, in my opinion.
Well, it's because, the politics takes precedence over actually keeping students in the center of the conversation. And so, but what you're saying is so important. And parents don't realize how many policies get implemented, statute, all these things that you never know about until it starts affecting your kid. You might not even know about it. But that's why we always tell parents, stay vigilant. And why on this show, I have tried to get a cross section of America here talking, because we see policy implemented in California and they get a foothold in California, and pretty soon that same policy shows up in Michigan and starts hurting kids in Michigan. And what you're saying now is, what state's next that's going to say, you know what, kids don't really need 180 days of education right now. So, 90 days, call it good. And,
Right. And it goes even further, even taking that into account, because they're not saying, they're going to be reallocating the funding, because if you're going to cut instructional hours, that means you're not going to have teachers working that much. And so, or you're not going to be needing certain supports or things that you pay, the status quo pays for itself because they're good at paying for themselves. And so I'm saying, if you're going to cut things, I didn't see you pair that with reductions of the funding that you get for paychecks and other supports. Whereas you could take some of those dollars, because if you're going to cut hours, then you give parents the opportunity to use some of their educational funding to get a tutor, to get that special needs person. And so that's the dangers of this. And that's why voting matters. We keep saying it. But in my community, I'm pushing back very hard, because we put the same people in office that you look at their voting records who have voted on things that harm us, and we'll put him back in office. Well, he's a nice young man. We went to church together. I can fellowship with you and still not vote for you. Okay, I can eat dinner with you and still not vote for you. So one does not equal the other. And so, then there's an awareness piece about the power of the vote. And so, and to every parent out there, I must say to you, Tilly, I'm looking at myself and say, I'm feeling tired. My mind feels a little scrambled. I'm trying to answer. So to all the people, parents, and social media land, if I'm sounding a little confusing at times, give me a little amnesty. I was in line 3 hours at the Park Motor Vehicle, and it's been a long week trying to fight for children. So if anything's a little confusing, feel free to just write a comment under Tilly's page.
Well, you're spot on. And one of our Facebook viewers here, Tracy Pavetti, who I happen to go to high school with, we grew up in the same little town in Colorado, but she's asking about this reduction in hours. And she's like, why did they do it? What was the reasoning? Was it funding? What was the logic?
The logic behind it, which was to me flawed, was because they're saying because the pandemic is so uncertain. But you've made a lot of certain rules that we have to go to the school, right? That teachers have to be in play, So then you don't reduce the instructional hours if you just said these kids are behind 6 months. You keep the hours in play and we do our best. Just do our best. And if for some reason you have to close them back down, then we continue to work on that online plan. But one thing Connecticut didn't do well is it didn't plan for the distant learning. It wanted to open up, physically to such a degree that they didn't put a solid contingency plan in play to ensure if for some reason, like you said, the COVID spikes. And that's the problem. So there was no rationale other than they thought, well, we might not last 100 and 900 hours. Well, then you do your best and then we adjust accordingly. You don't put no standards in play, but you kept the standards for paychecks in play. I know that. And so I have a problem with that because we are going to be facing, like I said, this fiscal financial tsunami. I don't care what state you live in, when your next legislative session comes back in and you got to balance that state budget, communities are going to be hit the hardest. Families are going to be hit the hardest. So everything you enjoyed, a lot of these, like I said, after school program support service that you may have been able to fight, squeaky get through, they might be totally eliminated coming up these next budget things. So we still haven't tapped into the fiscal crisis as a direct result of this pandemic.
No,
but there will be many hurting families.
I think many folks don't realize that the funding impact of this, we're like in Colorado, we had about a 5% reduction per pupil. We're looking probably at 30% next year as a result of this. I mean, it is, when you talk about a tsunami, this is going to be devastating. I mean, worse than, the recession that we had, 10 years ago. And that was painful. This is going to be a whole other degree of pain when it comes to budgets. So
you think about charters with that. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh yeah, charters online.
They are going to, Connecticut is going to go for them. I am so afraid. Yep. I've seen it. We've seen the writing on the wall that our status quo is going to use the pandemic to start to close down school choice options. You're going to use the pandemic to force us back in traditional systems that historically have not met our needs. And parents will need to be prepared. I say start looking for plaintiffs now. I'm looking for plaintiffs now because I know we're going to have to end up in somebody's Supreme Court. They're not going to do right. They're just not going to do right without a fight. And they're going to use the fiscal crisis of the pandemic to justify the erosion of school choice. And I think they're going to use the charters as a starting point.
Well, it
already started. Yeah.
It's always charters. And then if you're an online advocate like me, in the 10 years that my son was an online public school student, there was only 1 year that I wasn't in a state house someplace. And we lived in 3 different states doing online. Every year I was in a state house fighting for his right to be in that type of school and to have the funding. And we were historically, we've always been funded less, which makes me laugh now because all of the superintendent associations, the school board associations, our friends in the charter movement, who for the last 20 years that I've been doing this advocacy have said, you know what, online, they don't need as much funding. Guess who's all putting their hand out right now telling us that they need more money to do distance learning?
Technology, exactly.
It's funny how the tables have turned and you're singing a different song now when it comes to your kids. When it was my kid, he was only worth 75% of what his next door neighbor in the same grade public education was worth. So, but yeah, I think you're totally right. It's going to be ugly and parents need to be aware. Yes. And all of us advocates out there, we've got to get busy getting our game plan together.
And getting our narrative out there. We're not controlling the narrative. Sorry.
No, everybody, the other side, they're getting their game plan together.
Oh,
They're
very
playing.
much so. Oh, yeah, they are. Yeah. But for us, there's an opportunity to take back the narrative, right? It's an opportunity to rethink public education. There is a clear opportunity. I don't even think we know what the purpose is anymore. Well, I happen to know the purpose is to make sure funding pours into the status quo. I think I know the purpose of it. But if we actually made it children first, if we actually asked ourselves the question, how are the children, from that African saying? If we were to be true to ourselves, how are the children? They are not doing well right now.
Mm.
They are not doing well right now. And that's because the adults are in their heads, egos, ideologies, pandemic politics, elections in November. All these things are just muddying the water, which is taking the focus on some of the most vulnerable populations we have in this country or in the globe, and that's children. So we just have to do better. So I'm just doing my best. Like you said, all hands on deck. I'm doing my part. Everyone has to pull their weight. And there's an old Christian song when I grew up that says, and if you don't want to go, don't try to hinder me. So for those who don't want to help, you don't have to help, but you don't get the right to harm either. If you don't want to help, don't harm.
Get out of the way.
Get out of the way.
Get out of the way. Get out of the way.
Absolutely.
And so we're coming close to time here, but and you're out there every day trying to help your community. I know you have a rally coming up, Unity for Community.
Yeah, building unity for safer communities, because I live in a very small town, and we've had several shootings, like back to back, like 5 shootings, like 4 hours. It was crazy. I just never seen that. And so it goes back to all this free time. There's no support, because there were some young people involved. And it's going back to the lack of after school programs, before school programs. We need faith leaders. We need buildings. We need to get some of these. We can practice social distancing. We can do smaller size, but those children need supports. So parents need to, not just parents, I'm talking about the adults, decision makers. You need to just do common sense. If put your humanity hat on. Go get your moral compass out of the drawer, right? And let's just do right by these children, because it's not a soundbite. They are the future. They really are, and they're either going to be a taxpayer or a tax burden. There's only 2 choices here, and so if we work to ensure that they're self-governing students, that means we have to ensure they have a quality education that takes in account the whole child, which means we just got work to do.
We
and
have
I'm in it.
So much work to do, and you're doing the good work. You're in the trenches.
Thank you.
With your families, and we appreciate all that you do. If people want to follow you on social media or learn more about Connecticut Parents Union, how do they find you?
So if you want to reach out to me, I am Real Talk Gwen S on Twitter, Gwen Samuel on Facebook, Connecticut Parents Union on Facebook, and Connecticut Parents Union on Twitter. And I'm on Instagram, still trying to work that out, y'all. So don't quote me on Instagram, but I'm trying. But just remember, when it comes to children, it should always be non-negotiable. When it comes to their safety, their education, and their overall well-being. And my bottom line is, if you don't want a problem with Real Talk, don't start nothing with the children. There won't be nothing when it comes to the children.
That's right. I never want to be on the wrong side of Gwen Samuel. That's for sure. So
I'm weary though. I'm weary.
Yeah, well, you know what? You take a break and get your rest this weekend, and
because next week is
you can't what is it? You can't you can't run on empty, and so we need you well and rested, and that goes for all
of us. Yeah, we all need each other. Absolutely. We're in it together.
It's a stressful, hectic time, and we're all facing so many challenges, and let's take care of each other and lift each other up when we can. And in this movement, we really are. We're all in it together, and we are only, our movement is only as good as the fights that we fight for our kids, and how we help each other get every kid the educational opportunity that they need. So
Absolutely.
Gwen, thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you for having me with all my weariness and all the DMVs and all the crazy madness today. Thank you for the opportunity, and for other podcasts like you. Because
Well,
parents need to be able to get information.
You're amazing, and we'll share all your information in the comment thread with folks so that they can follow you on social media and be inspired, and hopefully send some love to Gwen, and
you need it right now.
Fill her cup, and give her the energy and the love that she needs to keep doing this really great work. So thank you
so much for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will see you next week on the Parent Exchange. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody.